Welcome. My name is Dr. Shane Clifton. I'm the Academic Dean at Southern Cross College, and I also teach theology, hence this particular course today. I guess I should start before going into the course telling you something about myself. I am 35 years old. I am married to Ellie, have 3 boys, Jeremy, Jacob and Lachlan, and we attend church at Camden Christian Life Centre. I am an ordained minister of the Assemblies of God in Australia, and was responsible with Pastor Stephen Fogarty for planning a church in the Chest Hill area, and have done a little bit of pastoring, but now my full-time ministry is focused on teaching. Well, it's good to sort of know you, if you can call talking into a camera and you seeing me on a screen knowing you. The topic for today, and indeed for the whole of this course, is Christian worldview. And I guess before we go any further, it's probably worth starting with a little bit of a definition and thinking about what we mean when we talk about the term worldview. The notion of worldview has its origins in philosophy, particularly in a German philosopher, a guy called Immanuel Kant's use of the German word Weltanschauung. And literally, don't worry about the German, you don't have to translate yourself or get too worried about that, but literally, the term worldview refers to our intuition of the world. Or maybe in more simpler terms, it is talking about the way in which we look at the world. You've probably heard the cliche, he or she looks at the world with rose-coloured glasses. And really what that's talking about is a person's worldview. And in that instance, obviously that person has a very positive worldview. And it's interesting, isn't it? Worldview determines the way in which you respond to situations. So if someone has a rose-coloured glasses type of worldview, then whatever the circumstances, they're likely to look and respond positively to those. They'll see the cup as half full, not half empty. And so you'll see someone going through a difficult circumstance, but they'll be able to always see the good in it. And of course, another worldview, maybe a more negative worldview, will look at the same set of circumstances and respond in a completely different manner, a very negative manner. And you can see immediately when you start to think about different worldviews how what you think about the world, the way you look at the world, has a huge impact upon the way you respond to the world, and really it's determinative for, well, your success or otherwise in life. We might define worldview then, and I've got this on your screen, as the set of beliefs about fundamental aspects of reality that ground and perceive all one's thinking, knowing and doing. Let me just repeat that for you. Worldview then is the set of beliefs about fundamental aspects of reality that ground and influence all one's perceiving, thinking, knowing and doing. Now let's see if we can flesh this out a little further. You might have, for example, heard about the term worldview using other language. For example, worldview might also be referred to as a person's philosophy or mindset or outlook on life. Yeah, you might have heard it referred to as someone's formula for life, or their ideology, or their faith, or even their religion. And it's interesting because, of course, the fact is that every person has a worldview. And whether they know it or not, they have a worldview, a way of looking at the world which colours their action. And of course, that worldview may be undeveloped. It may be intuitive. In other words, we might not be conscious of exactly the way we respond to the world. It might even at times be inconsistent. It's interesting that in certain areas we might, for example, as Christians, be very legalistic, and in other areas we might be completely liberal. And it's interesting that depending upon the circumstances, some of our worldviews are often inconsistent. Of course, at the same time, it may be that someone has spent some substantial amount of time thinking about their worldview, and it may be then that we could say that certain people's worldview, hopefully pastors and leaders in the church, is the result of serious reflection. Whatever the case though, the simple fact is that worldview frames the way people live, it frames the way people relate to one another, and it definitely determines the way they respond to circumstances. Well, we're going to be spending really the next 15 weeks considering different dimensions of worldview, but at the very least, a person's worldview is made up of some of the following components. It includes, for example, their beliefs about the existence and the nature of God. And it includes, for example, their beliefs about the origins and the nature of the universe. Think about these two things for a second. And obviously, whether or not you believe in God is a significant and substantial dimension of your worldview. Does an atheist respond to circumstances in a different manner to a Christian? Well, sadly, I guess not always, but hopefully that's the case. So that when a Christian looks, say for example, at the problems with the tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands of people, or when a Christian maybe looks at tragedy that's going on in life, they see the tragedy, they feel the heartache, but they also have a sense of hope and possibility because they know that there's never a time when God is not present, when God is not active in the world. And so, unlike the atheist who just looks at circumstances and says, well, such is life, that's simply the way things are, a Christian, someone who believes in God, is able to look at the same set of circumstances and say, no, there's possibility here, there's hope here. God can make a way where there seemingly is no way. And you can see immediately that your belief about the existence or otherwise of God makes a huge difference to the way in which you respond to circumstances. Of course, it's not only about belief about whether there is a God, but of course it's belief about what type of God there is. And so, for example, is the God that we believe in a fearsome and a scary God? Or is he a loving and a kind and gracious God? Or is he somehow both? And of course, depending upon the way in which you understand the nature of God, obviously that makes a huge difference about the way in which you respond to the world. So if God is big and scary and judgmental, then there's a good chance that you're likely to respond to the world in, a legalistic and maybe a dogmatic and maybe a more harsher fashion. I think we can see examples of that in fundamentalist Islam in the world at the moment. But I think also we can see that, or those sorts of things occurring in certain types of Christianity. Well, obviously, our worldview includes, for example, beliefs about the meaning and purpose of the universe. It includes things such as our understanding of the image of God and all of these various dimensions about self that help us understand who we are and what our purpose is in life. And, you might have heard the well-known contemporary, there's T-shirts, and I don't encourage you to wear them because they tend to be a bit rude and whatnot, but it's the Mambo T-shirt company. I'm sure you've heard of them, and they're the ones which have animals and doing all weird things. But there's one shirt which I really think is interesting, and it says, "Live fast, die young in a nice pair of shorts." And think about what that particular statement is making about the way in which a person understands themselves. And what it's simply saying is, hey, there's not a lot of point in life. You're just here to have as much fun as you can, and who cares what happens tomorrow. Clearly, that makes a huge difference, that understanding of self, to the way in which you respond to the world. Whereas Christians say that we are made in the image of God and we have a purpose. And that purpose is to give God glory and to exercise care for the earth. And obviously that self-understanding makes a huge difference to the way in which we live our whole lives. It makes a difference to the things that we do, the things that we consider to be important. And, obviously it's fundamental. Obviously, our beliefs about the nature and purpose of not only ourselves, but the whole world frame our response to the world. Do we think the environment is important? Well, obviously, depending on whether we do or don't, that determines how we respond to ecological concerns. Beliefs, for example, about what is good and bad, what is right and wrong, what is beautiful and ugly. In other words, our ethics have a huge impact upon our worldview and then upon the way we live our lives. Interestingly enough, beliefs about the nature and sources of knowledge also have a huge influence upon our worldview. What do we believe about the Scriptures, for example? Do we believe that the Scriptures are the source or the most important source of knowledge in the world? Or do we believe that the television is the place in which we get knowledge of the world? And obviously, depending upon your understanding of the source of truth, well, that will frame your entire worldview and it'll frame your action in life. More could be said. Our purpose in this course, then, is not to consider worldview in general, but, as the title of the course indicates, our purpose is to consider Christian worldview. And what we intend to do over the course of the next few weeks is to explore and develop the various elements that traditionally constitute Christian worldview. Of course, the fact is that hopefully most of you already have a Christian worldview. But most likely, then, that worldview has been formed by way of osmosis. You've just been, some of you maybe have been raised in church life. You might have gone to Christian schools and or non-Christian schools. Your family, your church, your friends, all of these various components have, and obviously the television, have influenced your worldview. But it's done so by way of osmosis. For most of us, the way we think just comes onto us from our family, our church, our friends, from society in general. But we never stop to think, well, is this a good or a bad worldview? And we simply believe what our parents and pastors and friends have told us and shown us, but we've not yet taken the time to question those beliefs, to determine whether those beliefs are true and sustainable and based on the Word of God. And that is obviously our intention in this course. It's to take that worldview which you already have and give you the opportunity to think through that worldview and to decide whether the things that you do believe are worth believing, or whether those things that you believe maybe need to be tweaked or amended, or maybe even, in some cases, thrown out altogether. A difficult process that, by the way. You should be warned up front that the process of thinking through your worldview can be quite a disconcerting one. And I'd simply encourage you to push through that process, because a belief or a way of thinking that cannot stand the test of questioning, that cannot stand up to the truth of Scripture, isn't worth believing in the first place. So that the process of thinking through your faith is a healthy process, even if at times it's a difficult process. Because sometimes if you have a belief that you've held all of your life, the process of thinking through that belief and questioning it and maybe even getting rid of it or nuancing it, it can be a little bit disconcerting. But I would encourage you, go through the process, because at the end of the day, what you'll be left with is a worldview that can stand the test of time, that's not going to get washed to and fro by the winds of change in society or by the different circumstances of life, but that will hold you in good stead and, well, keep you in the faith, hopefully, for the rest of your life. A Christian worldview, then, is a way of looking at the world that is informed by faith in Jesus Christ. Of course, there is actually no single Christian worldview. If you were to look around the group of people you're sitting with at the moment, or look at your church, or look at your denomination, or look at the worldview between denominations, what you'll actually discover is that there's 1,000 different worldviews. There's, even between two different people, a number of fundamental differences in people's worldview. Of course, there'll be things that we hold in common and things that are different. And one of the challenges of a course like this one is to think through those dimensions of our worldview which are fundamental. To think through those dimensions of worldview which you have to hold if you're a Christian, or otherwise to think through those other elements of worldview which one person can hold and another person doesn't have to. Our responsibility as Christians, especially as leaders, because you know as a leader, if you're a leader in the church in whatever capacity, whether you're the senior pastor or an associate pastor or an elder, or you lead a small group or whatever it is, The fact is that the things that you believe about God, self, world, not only impact your own behaviour, your own action, your own life, but they impact the behaviour and beliefs and the responses to the world of those people who you are influencing as a leader. So what that means is that if you're called to be a leader in the church, and I believe that ultimately we're all called to exercise leadership in the church to one degree or another, if that is your calling, then you have a responsibility to reflect upon your worldview, to make sure your worldview is biblical, to make sure your worldview is sustainable, to make sure your worldview is based on truth. Because what you believe frames the beliefs of others and consequently determines the way they live their life. Well, that reflection is the task of the discipline of theology, the task in which I'm a teacher. And as a teacher in theology, I cannot change your worldview. That is your responsibility. We're told in the Scriptures to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. That's Paul's words to Timothy. What I can do, however, is I can help you to think through the specifically Christian elements of your worldview by introducing you to the task of studying theology. So this subject that we're doing over the course of this semester is called Christian Worldview. But essentially what we're interested in doing here is looking at those unique or specific elements of worldview that frame our theology, our way of thinking as Christians. I guess I need to note something about theology before I go any further, having said that what you're doing is theology. It may be that you're sitting there now thinking, oh, that's not exactly what I signed up for. Because I think it's true that traditionally conservative Christians or Pentecostal Christians have been uncomfortable with the discipline of theology. We're generally happy to encourage Bible study and even to encourage practical study or, the study of practical leadership, etc. But we get a little nervous when it comes to the study of theology. My mother-in-law, who I love dearly and who's a very spiritual person, once asked me a question that is typical of Pentecostal people. And she said to me, is it hard to maintain your spirituality when you study so much theology? And I'm sure you've heard the same sort of thing sometimes from your pulpit. The idea that academics destroys your faith or theology destroys your faith. Too much theology kills the spirit. Once I heard this statement, happy is the Christian who's never met a theologian. And those sort of comments are not very good for my self-esteem. So if you ever bump into me, come up and say, oh, Shane, I love studying theology because it'll make me feel better. It's interesting, in fact, I go to a church now, and again, a gentleman I love would introduce himself every day, and he'd come up and he'd shake my hands and he'd come up and say, wow, a theologian who loves God, as though in his own mind those two things are self-contradictory. And I have to say that my experience with theology, and indeed with most people who teach theology, is that they do it because they love God and they want to know more about God. And look, I hope that that's the case for you. I hope that even if you're a little bit nervous about the study of theology as you're sitting there listening to this lecture, that during the course of this semester you find that study to be absolutely liberating, completely enjoyable, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is studying God, and what could be better than that particular exercise? Well, we're going to have a look maybe in a few minutes at some definitions of theology, but before we do, I need to state up front a similar thing to what I said about worldview, and that is, in fact, despite what people might think about theology, every thinking person, every person who thinks about the ultimate questions of life is ultimately a theologian. And I've got a little exercise that I do. I should say up front, and I have to ask you to forgive me because, well, I'm a sinner and my family and I like The Simpsons. And I'm sorry if that makes you very nervous about me. Hopefully you don't turn the screen off right now. But we quite often sit down and watch The Simpsons, not because I want my 11-year-old son Jeremy to model his life on Bart, But just because we enjoy the humour of it, we feel like it gives us an insight into contemporary society. And, well, sometimes it's actually worthwhile to say, well, Jeremy, don't do that. But anyway, for whatever reason, we like The Simpsons. And I've noticed over the course of watching The Simpsons how theological that show often is. And the interesting thing is, I've just made the claim that everyone is a theologian, and I'm going to make the bold declaration now that even Homer Simpson is a theologian. Let me read you a couple of quotes I've got here. Homer Simpson, referring to God. He says, he's always happy. No, wait, he's always mad. And what Homer is dealing with here is actually a classical theological problem. Homer's talking about God, and he's describing God's character and the way in which God responds to us. And he's actually addressing one of the more fundamental questions about the nature of God. We've got this issue in theology, which is God loves us, and God it delights in us, and God wants us to respond to him. And yet at the same time, we know that God is also a God of justice, and God exercises judgment on the world. And one of the fascinating dimensions of a Christian theology is to think, well, how are those two ideas held together? How is the love or the happiness, in Homer's words here, of God held together with the justice and the judgment of God? Well, there's Homer thinking through a theological question. He says another day, kids, God hates us. And I don't know if any of you have seen this episode. This occurs one day after Homer wakes up to discover that all of their Christmas presents have been destroyed. Now, if you have seen this episode, you'll know that actually what happened was that Bart gets up in the middle of the night, and I think he tries to open the presents earlier when he shouldn't, and ends up burning down the presents, takes them outside and buries them under the snow. So all the family gets up in the morning and discovers there's no Christmas presents. And Homer's initial response is to say, kids, God hates us. Now, again, it's not very good theology, but it is actually the sort of theology that we all think in the face of difficult and bad circumstances. And really what Homer is doing there is asking the fundamental question, where is God in bad circumstances? Or you might say it another way, why do bad things happen to good people? He says elsewhere, expressing the universality of God, you're everywhere, you're omnivorous. Now, I don't know whether you realise omnipresent would be what he should be saying, but you get the idea. On why we worship God, Homer says, it's because God is powerful but insecure. And it is actually one of those fascinating questions, which is, why do we worship God? I mean, are we worshipping God because God has, a big head and needs us to praise him because he's a bit worried about how he's feeling that day, which is, of course, one of the reasons. I don't know if any of you have kids, but if you've got kids, you'll know that that's why we praise kids, isn't it? Because kids are insecure and they need us time and time again to tell them how wonderful they're doing. And my son Lachlan is still doing swimming lessons. He's 6 years old. He's not bad. But I was watching a video of him the other day learning to swim, and he was doing backstroke, and he'd swim back and he'd basically sink under the water, and then he'd come back to me and go, wasn't that good, Dad? And I'd say, oh, son, you're such a brilliant swimmer. And then he'd do it again. And you find yourself praising him for this quite, useless effort of swimming, but it's cute, about 6 or 7 times, and each time he does it, he wants you to praise him. And at the end of the day, that is because his ego, his sense of self-identity needs to be built up and established. Well, is that why we worship God? Is it because he is powerful but insecure? And of course the answer is no. Ultimately we worship God, for our own sake, because worshipping God results in transformation of ourselves. That another time. But suffice to say, here Homer is answering a theological question. In the face of a hurricane, he once declared, I'm not much of a praying man, but if you're up there, please save me, Superman. In another instance, I think he's confusing God with Superman there, but I've got to say, if you've got children, you'll know that confusion is actually quite common. In another instance, you had a situation where Bart was playing hockey and Lisa decided to take up hockey. And Homer was very unhappy. He felt like hockey, and this is ice hockey, he felt like ice hockey was a boys' sport. So trying to prevent her from playing hockey, he says, if the Bible has taught us nothing else, and it hasn't, it's that girls should stick to girls' sports, such as hot oil wrestling and foxy boxing. Now, I just like that quote. But behind it, of course, is actually a fascinating question, which is, what does the Bible say about what boys and girls can do? And if you look closely at that quote, you'll see actually behind that particular issue is a fundamental question facing you and I as Christians today, which is to do with can we ordain women and all of those other sorts of questions. Look, the point of me saying all of that is that at the end of the day, well, I wanted to show you The Simpsons, but apart from that, at the end of the day, everyone is a theologian. Every thinking person, everybody who reflects about life's ultimate questions is a theologian, because all of these sorts of questions, who am I? Is there anything out there? What's my purpose in life? These questions ultimately point to God. And so everyone's a theologian. You can't help it. Of course, the issue is not whether you are a theologian, but it's whether or not you are a good theologian. Is your theology any good? Is it sustainable? Is it based on the Scriptures? Will it stand the test of time? And there's a guy called Stanley Grenz who was very influential in my own life, came to Australia a few times, and he's written a number of books in theology, one called Theology for the Community of God, which is worth reading if you're interested in doing some wider reading. But he, in fact, he died last year, I should say, age 55, of brain aneurysm, which was tragic, but he's left behind some substantial books, and hey, isn't it great that people can have an impact even after they're dead? But he wrote a book called Who Needs Theology? And in that book he argued that all people, and indeed all Christians, are theologians. Nonetheless, he says, not all theologies are equal. And he went on to categorise theology along a spectrum of reflection, which is worth thinking about this morning. And you've got the slide in front of you. The first category of theology he describes as folk theology. And he defines folk theology as unreflective believing based on blind faith in a tradition or a person. And he goes on to give a number of examples of people who he says are exercising folk theology. And look, there's a number of examples that I could give for you. The first that he has here is one that I don't know whether you've heard about, but certainly came to my church a number of years ago. The belief that there is a literal hell discovered by Russian scientists in Antarctica. And I've got the article in front of you, which you can have a look at there. But as you'll see, the article describes a situation where scientists in Siberia were out drilling down the earth, digging for oil, and they dug down 2 kilometres down into the earth and dropped a microphone into the centre of the earth. And what they discovered when they dropped that microphone into the earth was that they could hear the screams of hell. And so what apparently then happened is there was a newspaper article about this particular example, and it went round to a number of the churches, and it was used by churches. It came to my own church, I won't say where, as an example of, and this was a few years ago now if you're trying to hunt out where my church might have been, as an example of proof that Christians are right, there is a hell. Now, I guess the reason that this is folk theology, or the reason believing this is folk theology, is because too often Christians just accept these sort of things that come around without stopping to question whether or not they're likely to be true and whether or not they're sustainable according to the Scriptures. And there's at least 3 problems that I have with this particular article. The first is that it simply is not provable scientifically. And if you're interested in this, go and have a look on the web at this particular myth, and you'll see there's just hundreds and hundreds of references to it. And what you'll discover is people have tried to track down this particular doctor who's mentioned here and track down the circumstances, and it's actually not sustainable. This never happened, and there's no scientific proof that anyone dropped a microphone down into the centre of the earth and heard the screams of hell. So I guess what I'm saying to you there is, if we're going to accept something as being true or otherwise, what are the sources that is giving us this information? Folk theology just accepts whatever it's told without being prepared to ask questions about whether or not something is likely to be true. So here's just the plain scientific falsehood. But apart from that, there's actually a theological problem with this, because it assumes simplistically and naively that hell is some sort of purely physical place, as though the heavens are above the clouds, and as though hell is some sort of physical space in the centre of the earth. And of course, we realise that if we do some theological study, that when the Bible talks about heaven and hell, it's talking about realities which are not material, but which of course go beyond our present material reality. It talks about spiritual reality. So what actually happens when we accept this way of understanding hell is really we're misunderstanding the Scriptures. Now, it probably doesn't have too much effect, this particular belief, except for, I think what it does do is makes us look like idiots in the eyes of the world. Any scientist is going to turn around, if that's what we believe, and say, you people believing something like that are just naive simpletons. Because actually, in the centre of the earth is not hell, but is lava. And so I just think it makes us look like people who actually don't have a brain. Hey, there's 1,000 other examples that I could give you. Maybe let me give you one more of folk theology. And this one you might have heard of as well is, a few years ago, a guy called Michael Drosnin wrote a book called The Bible Code. And I don't know whether you've seen it. It was certainly a book that was sold in Christian bookstores around Australia and did get into many Pentecostal churches. And what Michael Drosnin suggested is that there's a hidden prophetic code that is contained under the text of Scripture. And he put a computer program over the top of the text of the Scripture and was able to discover hidden, and he ran that over the original Hebrew and Greek text, so he wasn't using an English translation. He was able to discover, using this Bible code, hidden predictions of the future. And supposedly he was able to discover, written in these texts, reference to September 11 and reference to Osama bin Laden and reference to other future predictions which haven't yet come true. And so here we are, this book going around Christian circles, telling us, affirming that, wow, here's the power of this book, it's mysterious. And people, Christians, just accepted that at face value. Again, that is folk theology because it doesn't engage in the critical task of reflecting about whether or not something like that is true, again, both scientifically and theological. As far as a scientific exercise goes, I've had people who have written books against this who go on and say they've applied the code, the computer program that Michael Drosnin uses to songs by Bob Dylan. And they've been able to come up with exactly the same sort of predictions. So there's something inherent in the way the code itself is written rather than in the text that is coming up with the predictions. But apart from that, even if you didn't know or weren't able to engage in the sort of maths that Drosnin is dealing with, we should be able to realise at face value that that sort of belief actually doesn't support the Bible, but it undermines the Bible. Later on in this course, we might talk about something which is referred to as Gnosticism, and you don't need to worry about what that is now. But Gnosticism is the belief that the Bible contains secret, hidden messages that if you get enough knowledge, you can discover. But that's not the Bible that you and I have. You and I have a Bible which you don't need to put a mysterious supercode computer program on top of to understand its meaning. But you and I have a Bible that is written in, admittedly, a language that isn't our own, but that is translated into now English or whatever language you have, that is meant to be able to be read and understood and applied to life without needing some sort of mysterious supercode. And what I suggest to you is that a book like Michael Drosnin actually undermines the Scriptures. There's nothing in the Scriptures here that suggests if you put a computer program over us, then you'll come up with mysterious predictions about the future. What that actually does is distorts the way in which we read this particular text. So in my view, actually, is anti-Christian. And again, it's just an illustration. But suffice to say that too often Christians simply accept what they're told without stopping and asking questions. And again, let me say this to you. If a belief cannot stand the test of hard questioning, then it isn't worth believing. Don't just accept what you're told. Any good pastor will say that, by the way. Admittedly, we need to listen to pastors and take them seriously. I'm a pastor. I want you to listen to my preaching and take it seriously. But I also don't want you to accept everything that I say in face value. Don't do this in this course. I want you to listen to me and turn your brains on. The fact is that in the process of studying theology, I am going to say things that you might or might not agree with. And what I'm suggesting to you is don't accept those things at face value. Now, obviously, of course, I have done and engaged in, 16 years of theological study. I've pretty well been a student since 1989 and finished a PhD last year. So I've engaged in a lot of study, and I do know certain things that you don't. But hey, I could still be wrong. And I may and often definitely am wrong on some of the topics that we discuss because I'm pursuing truth to the best of my ability. But you have the responsibility to work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. So in the process of this course, don't just believe what I say, investigate it, ask hard questions. At the same time, I would encourage you not just to write off what I say because it doesn't match up with what you currently believe. My challenge to you is to put your beliefs to the question, put your beliefs to the test of the Scriptures, and do the same with mine. Give me credit in that process, and Pastor Stephen Fogarty credit, as he'll do some of the lectures later on as well. Understand that we have studied these topics in a lot of detail, and we have investigated the Scriptures there. So if we say something that you don't agree with, don't just write us off immediately. Be prepared to think through what we say. Hey, and if at the end of the day we disagree, that's all right too, because disagreement is not necessarily the end of the world. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to not sit any longer at the level of folk theology. If you want to lead people, then you have the responsibility to develop, to think through your worldview. I think, by the way, that you should encourage everyone you come across to exercise that same sort of thinking process, because we don't want anyone in our congregations to just blindly accept what we say. All right, that's folk theology. At the other end of the spectrum, Grenz talks about academic theology. And he goes on to say that academic theology is highly speculative, it's philosophical, it's aimed at other theologians, and he says it's often disconnected from the church and may have little to do with concrete Christian living. Hey, that sort of theology is useless as well. If you get to know me and say, Shane, in that process you're just engaging in academic theology, the things that you're saying just don't bear any resemblance to faith, and, well, question me. Because obviously, if theology is so completely disconnected from the life of the church, then what's the point? But in between these two extremes, folk theology and academic theology, he lists a number of different types of theology. Lay theology appears when ordinary Christians begin to question folk theology with its childish and simplistic cliches and legends. It's when ordinary Christians develop a well-grounded understanding of their faith. And obviously, not everyone is called to do what I do, and not everyone is called to do what you are doing, listening to a Bible college lecture. But every Christian is called to think through their faith, to mature in their relationship with God, and to develop in their knowledge of God and in their knowledge of themselves and the world. That is, of course, why Christian churches put on discipleship programs, because we're not able to leave people, we don't want to leave people having to drink milk. We want to be able to give them the bread of the Word of God. Well, of course, apart from just lay people, there's another level of theology which Grenz categorises as ministerial theology. And ministerial theology, he says, is reflective faith practiced by trained ministers and teachers in Christian churches. I guess what is behind this statement is the recognition that ministers, that pastors and leaders have a huge influence on the theology, on the worldview of people in congregations. Given that that is the case, ministers, given the responsibility that they carry, there is, as a result of that, a necessity that those ministers train, think through their faith and engage in a higher level of theological reflection that is necessary for the average person. If you are called to be a minister or a senior leader in a church, then you have to ask yourself hard questions. You have to be prepared to ask the hard questions about the faith. Because I can tell you, if you don't ask them while you're studying now, at some point in time when you're in leadership, a person in your congregation is going to come up and ask you a hard question. And in this day and age, don't forget, no longer are we in a situation where most people are untrained. This is a day and age in which the general Australian population is increasingly educated. Most people in Australian society today have degrees. And if that is the case, then they're used to thinking, they're used to asking hard questions. And as ministers, we need to be able to respond to their hard questions and, give a good answer for the faith. I'm running out of time here, so just let me sort of rush through this. The final, or the fourth level of theology he calls there is professional theology, and I guess that's what I'm doing. Someone who is called to be a teacher to the pastors or a teacher to the teachers obviously needs to engage in even higher level or more critical thinking along the way. And hey, maybe that some of you are sitting there now and thinking, maybe that's what I'm called to. Well, who knows? Right now, don't worry about that. Your task is simply to start at the beginning and really go through some basic thinking about the various categories of your faith. Hey, we're almost going to finish now. Theology is a word which is a compound word, in case you didn't know. Theos is the Greek for God. Logos is the word for word, teaching or study. So theology then at its most simple is study or reflection about God. And in sum, I think or most people would define theology as faith-seeking understanding. Hey, the purpose of this course over the next number of weeks, not only of your listening to this lecture, but also of your study, is to say to yourself, this is what I believe about God, about myself, about the world as a whole. This is the categories of my faith. Now, let me try to understand that. Let me ask questions about whether or not that's true. Let me ask questions about where I got that belief from. And in the process of seeking to understand your faith, which is actually how you define theology, then what you'll discover is that your worldview will be developed. It'll be a hard process. Some things you'll have to change, some things you might have to get rid of, some things you already believe, you'll actually believe stronger. Because you'll know the foundations upon which they rest. That's the process of studying theology. Let me pray for you as we finish. Father, I thank you for every single person who is listening to this lecture. I ask that you'll give them a heart and a mind that is open to the move of your Spirit and to the voice of your Son. And I pray that in the process of studying theology, that while they think at first glance this is an academic process, they will actually discover time and time again during this course that they experience revelation, that they experience the move of the Spirit. I pray in surprising times, sometimes when they're reading a reading which is seemingly hard, I pray that all of a sudden your Spirit will bring truth out of the page. I pray that as they're listening to the lectures and trying to come to term with ideas, that each time they'll hear the voice of the Spirit, encouraging them, building them up, giving them revelation about your identity and about their own call and purpose. I pray that in the name of the Son. Amen. Go in peace.